You've probably seen me on the culinary videos and wondered about me and where this workshop came from. Well, this is my workshop. It doesn't belong to culinary, it belongs to me. When my wife and I bought this house, one of my intentions was to buy a house where I had a workshop. This was supposed to be a two-car garage. One of the doors was removed and a personnel door was put in to make it a one-car garage. And that one door hasn't been open in a long time because this is my workshop. It's 22 feet by 22 feet, and back behind me, you can't see it now, but you will in a moment, is a handicap ramp that was put in by previous owners. Maybe it'll be needed in years to come. It does take some room out of my workshop, but what I've got is what I've got. I'm here today to give you a tour of the workshop, show you where I work. This is a real workshop. This is not a TV set. I work on projects here every day. So let's take a look at what I've got here, and hopefully you'll enjoy seeing the place where I work, and maybe you'll get a few ideas for your own workshop. If you come in the door from outside, this is the ramp going up to the family room, and on the wall there you can see some antique tools that I've collected through the years. I'm not really a tool collector, but I like old things and I like antiques. Tools are just a natural fit for me, so every once in a while I'll pick up a tool here or there and add it to my wall. This is what I consider the main aisle of my workshop, mostly because this is where my workbench is. And I really designed this workshop around this workbench. Now obviously the workbench wasn't here at first. I brought my tools in and then I built the workbench. But it's one of the first things I did, because I knew I needed a workbench. I wanted to build a big workbench. One of my concerns is I need to build some doors for our home, and you need room for that. So this is 8 foot 3 inches long by 3 foot 3 inches wide. It stands 36 inches off the ground, which is a pretty good height. There's some storage underneath, which is mostly used for jigs and fixtures. The top is made of 3 layers of MDF, 3/4 inch layers, so it's a total of 2 1/4 inches thick, allowing me a good depth for bench dogs, basically, okay? I didn't know how many bench dogs I was going to want in here. I put a bunch of holes in. I've added more since then. I really like using bench dogs and the bench dog holes for holding my work pieces as I'm working on things. I do other things with those bench dog holes too to hold things. As you can see, there's a bunch of stuff on it. You know, when you're usually watching me in the videos, you see this all nice and clear except for what I'm working on. What you don't see is there's usually stuff stacked at that end and stuff stacked at that end, because this is a real working workshop, okay? The overall workbench weighs 460 pounds, so it's solid. It doesn't move around on its own. It's very flat, but I've got it mounted on those wheels that you can kind of like jack up by stepping on them, so I can move it around. This is where I'm usually working. Okay, now obviously for certain operations I move around to other parts of the workshop. Now this side of the aisle is where some of my tools are and my toolboxes. So as we work our way down this side of the aisle, the first thing is a shelf that's actually out of the image, and this is mostly just shop chemicals. Then my bandsaw, a router table, which hopefully I'm going to build a bigger one here pretty soon. Drill press, I've had this drill press for a long time. It was a low-cost drill press that I actually bought at Harbor Freight, and it has done extremely well. I have a XY table mounted to it, which is probably going to come off soon, and I'm going to build more like a box type table for it. But this allows me to do some limited machining of metal parts, which I do for some projects, obviously not woodworking projects, but 2 toolbox stacks, a machinist one and a mechanics one. I've got a wide variety of tools because I do a lot of different things. I don't just do woodworking. I've got mechanics tools to repair my cars. I've got some machinist tools from my engineering days. A lot of variety here. You'll notice I've got screwdrivers hanging on the side here, saws hanging on the side here. You can't see it, but I've got hammers hanging on the side here. I'm working on gradually moving more and more of my tools that I use all the time to more accessible locations, okay? Unfortunately, the way my shop is set up, I really can't do a tool wall behind my bench on either side. I'm making do with what I can. That's why I've done some of these racks, and I continue to add them as I find opportunity to do so. All the way back here in the corner, we've got my clamp rack. This is the same clamp rack I made on one of the culinary videos, and there's a little cubby hole here where I store smaller pieces of sheet goods, plywood, MDF, even some plastic. I have another storage area out in my shed where I do full sheets, but the cutoff sheets, say 1/3 of a sheet and under, they go right here so that they're readily available if I need small pieces for something. There's not much else I can do with that corner, okay? This is actually a tabletop for a table that's in process. Along this wall, I have a 16-foot long workbench as well, 2 feet deep. This was actually the first bench I built in here, and it was never built to be a working workbench, okay? This was built to be someplace to put some stationary tools and parts. You always come back from the hardware store with something, you need someplace to put it. That's what this is for. This is always a cluttered mess. I've got up above here, you can see all kinds of hardware drawers for various different types of hardware, both for home repair and for the various projects I work on. I have my sanders mounted here. I've got my belt sander mounted here. These are my 3 palm sanders, my Radial orbital sander. I would really like to have these closer to my main workbench, but I haven't found a good place over there to put them yet. So I created this little box so that I can actually just set the sander down while it's still idling down, and it can rattle around in that little box and it's just not going anywhere, okay? So that works out pretty well. Then I've got an oscillating spindle sander right here, which is much more useful than I ever expected to be. Underneath, there's a couple of generators. There's more storage for various different types of things. This is my old workbench. If you ever remember from high school science, the science teacher would have like a roll-around cart that they do experiments on in front of the class. This is one of those. I don't know how it ever got to me, but I ended up with it. And for years, this was the only workbench I had. So this is about maybe 2.5 by 4 feet. It's not real big. I use this predominantly as a repair area. If I've got to repair a tool, I've got to repair my wife's vacuum cleaner. It's also a staging area. Here's a project in process, and there's several other bits and pieces of projects in process that are sitting here waiting for me to get to them. Underneath here is storage for most of my handheld power tools, and it's just a useful catch-all type of an area. Unfortunately, sometimes being a catch-all area, it gets covered up with stuff. So moving farther down this same workbench, I've got my scroll saw mounted to the bench right here. The oscillating spindle sander is just on this other side of me, just outside of the image, okay? My scroll saw, again, more part storage for hardware, some electronic parts, plumbing repair stuff, you name it, right? And over here I've got my lathe. I just bought this a couple years ago, got into wood turning. I don't do a lot of it because I'm busy with so many other projects, but I do have a lathe and I enjoy it. I won't say I'm good at it yet, but it's a lot of fun. Here again, I'm trying to use visible storage where I can put it. I've got a lot of my lathe accessories up there on the wall. Still trying to figure out some place to put a good place for the various chisels and tools that I like. I've seen a lot of good ideas that other people have done that just don't fit in the space I have available. So I'm still playing around with that idea. One of these days I'll have something there. I refer to this area right here as my cutting center. I've got my old Craftsman radial arm saw and my new table saw here. And I've got them set side by side, which works out really great because quite often I'll end up using the two of them together. I'll rip some material down and then have to cut it off to length. Now, some people might wonder, why do I have a radial arm saw instead of a miter saw? It's simple. It's that back when I got this, miter saws were still a pretty rare thing. They're a relatively new tool invention, okay? I have owned this saw since late 1970s, early 1980s. I've had it for a lot of years. I've put a lot of wood through it. By having the two of them side by side, not only allow me to move material back and forth, but they can serve as staging areas for each other. So if I'm cutting something on the table saw and I need to set the material down, I can set it on the table of my radial arm saw. Or if I need to cut something on the radial arm saw, I can use the table saw. And the height of the table saw is just perfect. I can put a block of 4x4 on the table here, and it now becomes an extension for long boards coming over here to my radial arm saw. At the same time, having an angle like this, I've got a good 8 feet of space running in, and the material running out can run right onto my workbench. So kind of an odd setup. You know, most people build their workshop a lot around the table saw, but because I built my workshop predominantly around my workbench, trying to work this out with a table saw took a little bit of doing. I first had it lined up with the workbench and I had it the other way, and I eventually came up with this angled idea, which, although it looks a little weird, gives me excellent material flow using the saw. So this leaves us this fourth corner, I guess we could call it, of the workshop, which I kind of think of as the odds and ends corner. Originally, the intent was that this area would be mostly open, so I have some place to assemble larger things. There's not much open space. What happens a lot here is this is where things that are waiting for me to work on or things that I am in the process of working on end up being stored. For example, there's a dining room chair right here just below your vision that is one of our dining room set that I'm having to rebuild. Totally, it just, the frame came apart. There's a filing cabinet here, a little old antique 2-drawer filing cabinet that I've got to put a new veneer top on. This shelving unit here is mostly stuff for various projects in process or projects that are waiting for me to get to it. Here's a tabletop for a little antique table, and there's the legs for it. My soundboard for recording is there. Bits and pieces of a lot of different things, okay? Back behind me is a Craig adaptive cutting system, which is a new addition to my workshop. I just got recently. It's designed for cutting sheet goods, pieces of plywood. It combines the idea of a track saw with a table that just blows ability of the track saw up to another level. And it's amazing some of the things you can do with that system. That's a new addition thanks to the folks at Craig, and I'll be talking about that more at another time. I've got my planer here. This is the wall planer. As far as I'm concerned, the best small planer you can buy. It gets a fair amount of use here. That's another relatively new addition. I've had it for a couple of years. And the stand is on higher than normal, but that's partially because I use it for storage. The outfeed of it is above my workbench top, so I can actually feed it out onto the workbench. Instead of being at level, I can actually let the material slide out and fall down onto the table and stack. A little different, okay? And then here is a antique jointer, 1938 Delta jointer that I found for a whole $20 that I'm supposedly restoring, if I can ever find some time to restore. I don't have another jointer in my shop, so if I ever manage to restore that, it'll be great. And then just at the edge of your screen here, you can see some boards standing up. This is where the majority of my material storage here in my shop is, here between the garage door and the personnel door. It's about a 4.5 foot, maybe 5 foot wide area where I've got built a rack where I've got material stored. I also have some material stored up above my lathe and up above the bench on the back wall, up above all those little parts cabinets. But I'm really limited on material storage. I always have some material on hand, especially things that I use a lot. But most of the time, if I'm doing a project that takes any type of real quantity of material, I end up making a trip out to buy the material for it. What you're not seeing in this video is what I refer to as the annex. I've run out of space. That's basically all there is to it. I am more or less a full-time woodworker now, between the things I do for Sawnary, the things I do for other customers. I do some commission pieces like this that I'm building here, and my own work that I'm doing for my wife and I. So I'm pretty much doing woodworking almost all the time. And I've run out of space. So we have a shed out back. It's a 12 by 18 foot shed that has been a combination garden shed and my drying room for like slabs and chunks of logs that I pick up on the side of the road. And it is being taken over. It is my annex now for my workshop. I'm building another shed, which is where the garden stuff will go. And I've set up a finishing area out there, because really finishing in a dusty workshop is not a good idea. You need someplace where you can get rid of the sawdust. I've got my laser engraver set up out there, and I'm going to be setting up a clamping table out there so that when I've got to clamp something up and allow the glue to dry, I can do it out there and keep my workbench free for working on other things. And I'm sure there'll be other things that'll end up going out there too. So yes, I am expanding, but it's hopefully with the intent of just being able to do things better. So now you've seen my workshop. It's not perfect. I'm always improving it. I'm especially improving storage in here. That's a constant battle, trying to find better ways of storing things, and especially storing them accessible. I mentioned about the saws and the screwdriver and the hammers. I've got a set of chisels here right on the end of my bench. I'm just constantly looking for ways to store more where it's readily available, where I don't have to leave my workbench to grab the things that I use the most commonly. Is this a realistic workshop for a home hobbyist? I would say it is, because that's what it was really built to be. I didn't build this workshop or set up this workshop with the idea of Sawnary or any other outfit. I did have the idea of maybe as a retirement business doing some videos and doing some woodworking projects, making some things for sale. Hopefully a little better than the stuff that you find at the crafts fairs. I wanted to try and go at a little higher level where I could charge a little more money and actually make a profit at it. But it was never intended to be a professional workshop. So although I'm using it as a professional workshop, this is a home hobbyist workshop. That's what it is intended to be. You notice the tools I've got around here. I don't have high dollar tools. I have the type of things that the average home hobbyist would use. I've been collecting tools for a lot of years. One of those roll around toolboxes there, the machinist one, that comes from my engineering days. Well, we're talking a good 30 years ago there, that most of the tools that in it. One final thing I want to mention I've got here is I have an air filtration system that's hanging from the ceiling. And that's an important thing to have in a shop. Woodworking creates a lot of dust, and dust is harmful, obviously, to your lungs. Safety is important. You probably see me wear hearing protection a lot in my workshop when I'm running the tools, okay? You don't see me putting on face masks or goggles, but that's because I'm wearing safety glasses. Go ahead and make your comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about my workshop, and how about posting some pictures of your workshop too? We'd love to see what you've got and how you're doing and how you're dealing with the problems of working in limited space. Till the next time, let's go make some sawdust.